Good day, everyone. Now, as you know, I do a lot of shows on mental health, but rarely, in fact, this will be the first time I've got the privilege now to sit down with a Navy psychiatrist who has actually worked in almost every branch of the military. I believe you've even the VA. And Dr. Robert Marietta, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and talking to us about the inside scoop of what goes on with military mental health. I was very lucky to receive an advance copy of your manuscript. And oh my gosh, what a testament it is to not only the hardworking men and women in mental health, but the insurmountable challenges that many of them face in trying to practice mental health. But before we get started, as I always do, welcome to the Stories of Service podcast. Ordinary people who do extraordinary work. I'm the host of Stories of Service podcast. And to get us started, as I always do, here's an introduction from my father, Charlie Pickard.
From the moment we're born and lock eyes with our parents, we are inspiring others. By showing up as a vessel of service, we not only help others, we help ourselves. Welcome to S.O.S, Stories of Service, hosted by Teresa Carpenter. Hear from ordinary people from all walks of life who have transformed their communities by performing extraordinary work.
And as I said, welcome to the Stories of Service podcast. Dr. Robert Marietta is a military psychiatrist and author of the new book, Reflections of a Military Psychiatrist. His work offers a rare and candid look at the mental health challenges faced by service members from the perspective of the professionals who treat them. Today, he will be sharing his experiences serving at the Naval Medical Center Portsmouth during the 2022 suicide clusters aboard the USS George Washington and at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Maintenance Center, offering insight into the human cost of military service and the systemic pressures impacting mental health in the armed forces. We'll also talk briefly about Dr. Marietta's career journey from earning his medical degree at St. Louis University to completing his psychiatric residency as Chief Psychiatry Resident at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, to serving as Division Psychiatrist in Okinawa with the 3rd Marine Division. And then after his time in the Navy, he continued to serve through the U.S. Public Health Service, completing tours with the Air Force, Coast Guard, back to the Navy, and most recently, Veterans Affairs. He's received numerous awards, including 2 Public Health Service Outstanding Service Medals, 2 Presidential Unit Citations, and campaign medals for the COVID-19 pandemic and Ebola response. A fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, he remains deeply committed to supporting service members, veterans, and their families. Welcome again, Robert.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So first off, I always ask people the most basic question. Where were you born and raised, and what made you decide to initially join the service?
So I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but I spent most of my childhood in a small town called Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And it's kind of in the Boot Hill of Missouri. It's the biggest city between St. Louis, Missouri, and Memphis, Tennessee. And it's a pro-military town. And have you ever seen the movie Gone Girl with Ben Affleck?
I have.
Yeah, that was filmed in my hometown.
Yeah.
But I was a competitive swimmer growing up, and then I went to St. Louis University for undergraduate and med school. And I should mention my grandfather was an Army doctor, and I've got his uniform here behind me. He was a World War II doctor, and he ended up becoming a pathologist, and my dad was a cardiologist. And so I kind of continued the family tradition of being a physician. And St. Louis University it's a Jesuit school. It's kind of like, they call it the Georgetown of the Midwest. It's a Catholic school, and it's focused on public service. And I was staring down a lot of medical debt due to the cost of education. Maybe I won't say when I went to school because I don't want to date myself. But yeah, going to medical school is very expensive. And I came to find out about the Health Professional Scholarship Program, which basically the military will pay for you to go to school. It's like a full ride. And then when you graduate, you are commissioned as an officer. And it was very competitive, and I applied to different services. But So I joined the Navy that way, and it was a great thing. Like, I'm a pro-military guy. I was a competitive swimmer, and it sort of combined all my interests together. I was going to be a doctor, and I was going to be near the water. And so that's kind of how it ended up for me. But I after I graduated med school, I went to National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Now it's called Walter Reed, and I did a 1-year internship in internal medicine. In the Navy system, you have to apply for more training, and it was like impossible to get internal medicine. You have to go on what's called a GMO tour. Being a competitive swimmer, I wanted to do an undersea medicine specialty, but that didn't work out. But I applied for psychiatry, and I was offered the position, and it was a great, very great career decision. Like, I love the field. You actually get this, if you do internal medicine or another field, you don't get much time with a patient. But in mental health, you get to spend a lot more time with the patient and get to know them and talk about things. So it's been a great career decision, and I've been doing military mental health ever since.
Awesome. Awesome. So tell me, at that first duty station that you went to in the Navy, tell me a little bit about some of the observations that you had for your first impressions of working in the military mental health field.
So I think are you talking about the Washington, D.C., like the National Naval Medical Center?
Yes.
It was just kind of a rude wake-up call, because I was used to living or working like at a civilian hospital where everyone is kind of warm and collegial. And the Naval Medical Center was very malignant and kind of toxic. And a lot of times I felt like it was Darth Vader choking me. And it was completely unnecessary. And there was some like hazing and bullying. And, it was, it really was a wake-up call to kind of go through that. And people would, like, they would scrutinize you, and they would say, you're not wearing the proper uniform, or you can't wear scrubs in a hospital. And I mean, like, there's a point to it, but it was just kind of carried away. Like, it was kind of toxic. And it took me a while to really adapt and adjust to that. I call that like the military persona, and some of the senior doctors that I work with, they were, not only were they senior doctors, but they were like Navy captains, and they wanted everyone to know that. Like, and they wanted to make their presence and their authority known. And it was a bit too much. But I figured out, I think my colleagues felt the same way, and we kind of toughened up, and we figured out how things work in the military, and then we just kind of adapted and went with it, and we embraced it. Like, you have to in order to survive.
You do. You have to find a way to be resilient, even when you're in a toxic work environment and dealing with those challenges. I think the other thing that struck me when I was reading that portion of the book was also the procedures and processes that you got exposed to, and how the programs and the programmatic side of mental health was not necessarily organized in a way where you guys felt like you were set up for success.
Yeah, so I did my mental health training at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth. Like, after I transferred, I went down, but it was getting a little bit of an echo here. But yeah, it was difficult. It was very busy. Shoot, I don't know what's going on with the echo. Are you hearing that?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine, and I'm not hearing the echo too bad.
Okay. But yeah, like the Navy, it's like very busy. I was working very long hours, and very, very challenging. Anytime a ship would go out, 10 people would come to the emergency room and say that they couldn't go out on the ship. So I was working very long hours, sometimes like 80 hours a week or more, doing that, like working on an inpatient unit, working in the emergency room.
What were some of the common challenges that you would say that you encountered while you were at Portsmouth? Like, what were some of the repeated patterns that you saw?
Just So I would say people or sailors would come to the hospital complaining of toxic work environments and having difficulty coping. And then, they would be in distress as a result. Like they would be thinking about, hurting themselves or other kind of dysfunctional behavior. And so like they would present in a crisis and they would say, I've got to get off the ship. I've got to get off the ship. And so our job was to assist them, and offer them like reassurance and encouragement, but also to, focus on like fitness for duty. Like what is their diagnosis? Can they continue on in the Navy? And like, what are we going to do with them?
Did you feel like at that point you had complete ownership of that decision? Like, did you feel like you were being pressured, or did you feel like any of your colleagues were being pressured to give a certain diagnosis or to give certain opinions at that point?
Yeah, I would say that there was a lot of focus on adjustment disorder and personality disorder, and that a lot, the senior doctors would overdiagnose people with adjustment disorder and personality disorder, and they would say the treatment is getting them out of the Navy. And so, we would take like an administrative action and write a letter saying that this person was incompatible with the Navy, and then they would be released from the Navy. But it's challenging because a lot of the sailors, like, they seem to want that. They would present, and then you would say, well, what can I do to help you? And then you say, well, if we let you out of the Navy, is that going to solve your problem? And they would say, yes, it's going to solve the problem. But yeah, it's very stressful, like as a mental health provider dealing with that. Like people are complaining of toxic work environments, and then they're desperate, and we're trying to figure out what to do and how to deal with them. And I would say, over the past 20 years, I think some of that has changed. Like there's more controls and more regulations as far as like trying not to diagnose people with adjustment disorder and personality disorder.
Yes. I remember when I fought my med board to stay in the Navy back in 98 rather, that everybody that was in my discharge planning group all had adjustment disorder and personality disorder. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of borderline personality disorder. And I didn't understand at the time that that was a very common diagnosis that everybody would get. Can you tell me a little bit? I'm curious, is those diagnoses harder for people to collect benefits when they're med boarded, or does it make a difference?
Well, a personality disorder is considered it's called a CND. It's called a condition not disabling. So it's not a boardable condition. Like you can't get any kind of disability rating. So, I have talked to veterans that had more severe conditions, and the military, misdiagnosed them or, diagnosed something like that. And then it did affect the person. Like the person felt harmed. They felt like the mental health provider, didn't behave in an appropriate manner, and then they felt hurt by the organization, and it just kind of left a mark on them. So yeah, it does affect people. It does affect their benefits, and I have seen situations. In fact, I got an argument with a military mental health provider one time. Like they wanted me to change the diagnosis so that they could facilitate administrative discharge. And I said, I'm not going to do that. Like, I don't feel like it's appropriate. And I feel like I was retaliated because of that. But I think it has gotten better over the years, but I still think it's a problem.
Right. And I think that that's one of the things that people aren't even educated about either. A young junior sailor doesn't understand that when they're getting that diagnosis, it definitely impacts their ability to later on collect benefits, because a lot of times I would argue that if somebody's suffering from some of those issues, they also might have anxiety, they might have PTSD, they might have other issues that the provider might not be screening for, because they're just looking for that easy thing that can immediately process them out. And so now the service member might be in a position where they're going to have to go to the VA and try to get a higher level review after their initial review, or they're going to be prolonging their process out for something that they legitimately could be suffering from. But because they were given that initial diagnosis because it was the easiest way to process them out, we may not be serving the member in the best possible way.
I do want to mention, I think a lot of times in the military, things go well. And I guess I'm always an optimistic person. I think the things that we're talking about do occur and is a problem, but I hope and I feel that most of the time things go well. But I think it's a valid criticism, and veterans tell me all the time they feel harmed by this. And you know, in my book, I talked about I was at a department meeting, and the department head, he stood up in front of everyone and said, "Don't diagnose post-traumatic stress disorder because it's going to affect the command's ability to take administrative action." And you know, shortly after that, I wrote about, we had a patient that had post-traumatic stress, and the other mental health provider said, "Well, that's the diagnosis, but I can't write it in the chart. Like you heard what the department head wrote." And I think it is a problem, and but the benefit stuff is very complicated. I really don't know exactly how that works, but I think the other issue, and I wrote about this, I feel like numerous times in my book, is if you have a mental health provider who's behaving like that, then they are sending a message, a viral message, like, don't ever go talk to the ship psychologist, or don't ever talk to this mental health provider because this is what's going to happen to you. And I feel like that actually is possibly a bigger problem. And I was talking to somebody recently, and they said that there was a fatality on a ship, and they were impacted by it, and they wanted to get mental health treatment. And they said they would never, ever talk to the ship psychologist because of their reputation and because of the things that they had seen happen to their fellow sailors. And I think that's a problem. Like, I think that I would like to see, you know, mental health providers not be involved in things that are negative, or at least that people perceive as negative, because then if somebody's having a problem, they can trust the person they're talking to, and they don't have to worry about those kind of things.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely. And I think that, unfortunately, the disciplinary system and the mental health system are joined. They're joined together. And there are people who are facing disciplinary issues at times who are worried that their mental health history will be weaponized or used against them in an administrative or a court-martial procedure. Is that something that you've seen or experienced firsthand?
Yeah, I have seen that, and that's something that I feel like could be tightened up with the DoD, that they should put better protections on records to say that you can't use somebody's mental health records against them. And I think there's a number of reasons why. I mean, one is kind of like we were talking about. If you have a fear that what you say is going to be used against you, then you're not going to get help. Like, you're going to avoid getting help, and you're going to suffer in silence, and it's going to make things worse. So actually, you know, improving confidentiality and protections, I feel like, is better for the military. But I can tell you, you know, for example, I worked at a substance abuse treatment program for the Navy briefly, and sailors would, you know, they had like an incident, like a police blotter incident that brought them into treatment. But then it was clear that there was a bigger problem going on. Like, they had used another substance, but they're absolutely terrified to make a disclosure. You know, like, I guess it's kind of bad enough, but whatever happened, you know, like, they're afraid they're facing possible, you know, consequences from that. But if they were to open up and say, you know, look, there's actually more to it. Like I was doing something else and I really want to get help. But so I think it makes more sense to, have like protections in there and then allow people to discuss fully, what happened. I think a related thing is like family advocacy. If there's an allegation of domestic violence and there's more to the story, people should be able to open up and talk about it for the purposes of like getting help and strengthening families and not be afraid of the consequences that happen. But the command, a lot of times they have like a lot of power. They can look at people's medical records and things, and it's like the command is kind of a prosecutor and a helper at the same time. And it creates a really awkward situation for a service member because it's hard to trust somebody who's prosecuting you, So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think a lot of times, like, I wonder if there should be an independent prosecutor that would vet situations that way, like everyone kind of stays in their lane. But I have seen situations. I put a thing in my book where like I was given a memo and it said like, please disclose all mental health records for the certain person because there's an investigation. And I don't feel like that's a good idea. Like I feel like it tarnishes the image and reputation of mental health. And I think if somebody did something wrong, like they shouldn't need to dig through their medical records in order to.
I think that you could prove that they committed the issue or they did the issue, and you can divorce mental health from this completely and still conduct a good investigation, in my view. And I think that, like you said, it will just discourage people from receiving treatment if they know that anything that they say is going to go back to their boss. I mean, we wouldn't have somebody from Target who's having problems. Their bosses get the mental health history thrown at their bosses. So why do we let people do that in the military? Now, I agree with you on a safety issue. Somebody who's going to harm others or harm themselves, I see that being a notable exception. But beyond that, I think that we really do need to make this process something separate, because some of the stories you shared in the book, they break my heart. And they were, and then you also share a lot of success stories too. So don't get me wrong. There were a lot of times where mental health got it right. You were able to help somebody who needed the help. They went on and they did great things for our Navy. So we're not saying that those stories don't exist, but one of them that really stood out to me was when there was the sailor who had a lot of physical issues. I think it was with her back, I want to say. And she kept getting sort of the runaround. And then turns out that there was really a mental health issue that was underlying it that wasn't being treated.
Yeah, you see a lot of that. And then there's like people are accused of malingering. And then you see these situations where, like I would say sometimes there's like these blurred boundaries between the mental health provider and the command and other, agencies, and then it's like the mental health provider kind of gets drawn into the prosecution, and they're talking about how they're going to, how they're going to deal with somebody. And it just, I don't feel like that's right. I feel like it should be completely separate lanes. Like the mental health provider should not be, colluding with the command. And that's a big recommendation I had at the end of my book, is that there should be a DoD instruction, and it should say that communication between a command and a mental health provider should be positive and focused on strengthening a member and reducing crises. And there should not be collusion regarding, disciplinary actions or other things. I think if they could make some of those changes, I think mental health would be better in the military. But yeah, you just see stories like that where the command, like it's like the dual agency where the command is the prosecutor and helper simultaneously, and it just doesn't go well.
Right.
I feel like it kind of sets people up for failure.
So Darren Lopez had a question here, and he says, how does this work for people to have their mental health history disclosed with HIPAA laws. Are commanding officers exempt from those HIPAA laws?
So I may not be the person to really give you, like a solid answer on that. But if you look at the HIPAA statute, there's actually an exemption in there for the military. And I do believe that commanders, at least at some points in my career, commanders have the authority to review somebody's medical record. And also, the commander has like a medical advisor, and that person has the authority, I would think, to like review a medical record and then provide feedback to the commander. And I would just say, 9 times out of 10, everything goes well. Like they're trying to
help the sailor, help the people.
I did tell some stories in my book where, the command worked with mental health and they really wanted to help somebody, and they want to know, what's going on so that they can assist the member so that they can, make things have a good outcome.
Right. Tell me a little bit about what happened when you were the physician on the, I think it was at Portsmouth Naval Hospital, and the USS George Washington had a cluster of suicide deaths. Tell me a little bit about what your involvement was during that time frame.
Well, I was an outpatient provider working in the clinic, just seeing patients. And then also I had worked at the SARP, at the alcohol treatment program. So, but I was at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, I think from 2019 to 2022. So I kind of saw, what events leading up to it, and kind of, what happened in the aftermath. But yeah, it's kind of like captures, I mean, I feel like in my book, I tried to discuss, what I feel like military mental health struggles with, so I feel like the IG reports and things like it was kind of like an investigation, but it really didn't talk about the mental health, and the stuff where the people don't trust the mental health provider on the ship. Like that was something that I heard consistently. People having difficulty accessing care, like the ship's mental health, having a multi-month backlog, and really the same as the Naval Medical Center. And then, just kind of like what they were talking about with the MARMAC, like, all these people on limited duty, and people complaining of toxic work environments and being placed on limited duty. And you had like 1,000 people on limited duty and undergoing the med boards process. And yeah, just kind of the system kind of being overwhelmed
and backlogged, right? People staying on light limited duty for extended periods of time. And sometimes that lack of a mission and lack of purpose while they're on light limited duty also contributes to exasperating some of the mental health problems.
Yeah, I think so. It's like people, it's always complicated. There's always multiple factors going on that affects people. But let's say you're in a toxic environment that's understaffed and you're under extreme pressure, and then you kind of have a breaking moment, and then the people on the ship are mad at you because instead of having 10 people, now they have 9 people. So they blame you for, basically having kind of falling apart, and then you get put on limited duty. So you're hurting from that. Like the sailors are hurting from how they were treated, from their working environments, from kind of toxicity, and then they get put on limited duty, and then they're kind of lacking purpose and structure. And this is all through my lens. Like somebody may disagree, but yeah. And then the mental health system, kind of being flooded with too many people and having trouble getting in there to be seen in a timely manner. And then, in the MARMAC investigation reports, it talked a lot about limited duty and med boards, and just having trouble tracking people, that people kind of get lost in the system and slip through the cracks, and then just a high turnover of personnel. Like it's people like me are kind of burned out and frustrated, and then all you can really do is kind of move on to a different job. Or like there's a high demand of mental health services in the Navy, so it's like you're always getting moved somewhere else. Like there's always a crisis somewhere else or a greater need, so you get pulled and you get moved somewhere else. And then another thing that was going on was the DHA takeover, I guess the Defense Health Agency, and they're trying to figure out like what their direction is and how they're going to proceed forward. And it just affects everyone. Like you're trying to. It seemed like there's a lack of a clear direction or vision. And then we also had a problem with like the mental health provider contracts. I wrote about that in my book, where one day I came into work and a bunch of doctors like quit, and they said that I guess their contracts, like a new contractor took over, and they were told they had to take a significant pay cut. And then it's like, life doesn't work like that, so it's like people are like, okay, I'm gonna find a different job.
Yep.
Yeah, just kind of a mess, people stressed out, and everyone trying to do the best they can and advocate for the sailors in the face of all these issues.
Right. And one of the ways that I think that the military can improve this is when they are facing provider shortage. What they did here, I can speak from personal experience here in Gulfport, Mississippi, was that you get referral to a community care provider. So that can also alleviate that burden, is if the person is unable to be seen at the military clinic, then there needs to be an option available for the person to receive a referral to a place out in town. Obviously, that won't work for somebody who's deployed, but for the people who are still stateside, I think that's a really great option, because then that can fill the gap when those services aren't available. And I mean, we all know there are things like Military One Source or Fleet and Family, but the other issue with doing that instead is that you're not going to get medical care. So you'll get counseling, and sometimes that's all you need. And you have to make that decision about whether or not you want to receive straight counseling through Military One Source or through Fleet and Family, or you want to receive medical care. And then another thing people don't think about, and I didn't until I was near retirement, is that those records from Military One Source or from Fleet and Family don't just automatically go in your medical record. And so if you're needing documentation later on for a disability claim, once you're out of the military, it is on you to ensure that you've gotten those records from those other clinics. And even if it is a community care clinic, it would apply in that regard, is that it's on you to get those care records if it's not through military mental health or not through a military provider. So that's another thing that I think a lot of people don't think about, because I'm having to chase down a lot of civilian documentation, because those kinds of records aren't an automatic procedure. The burden is on the service member to get those records and ensure that they're updated to their file.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. But as you're talking, I'm just kind of thinking about my time with the Navy and other services. But yeah, it's kind of a mess sometimes, because it's like the folks are getting counseling from those family programs, but the hospital providers, like, you can't see what's happening. Like there's a kind of bureaucratic or stovepipe mentality. And so, like I would see a sailor and they'd say, well, I saw the counselor of Fleet and Family Services 32 times. And I'm like, well, what was that for? Or what were you diagnosed with? And what was the type of treatment you received? And you can't really see it. And you get this kind of fragmented care where everyone's kind of all over the place. But yeah, what works best is when there's crosstalk, when people, when I worked for an Air Force clinic, and for example, family advocacy fell under medical, and that was different than the Navy. And the family advocacy team, they had offices in the mental health clinic. So you could walk down the hall and talk to a family advocacy clinician, and they had better sharing of information and records. But yeah, they call that, if you see a non-military provider, a lot of times the medical records, they don't make it into the system, and that
no,
affects.
you have to. It's on you to do it. It is on the service member 100% to do it. And more junior service members aren't going to think to do that, just because it's not something that you sometimes don't even understand why you even need them at that point. And then it's sometimes too late to do that. One of the things I had to do when I was in London is, after almost every appointment, I had to get copies of my paperwork. And then I just worked a relationship out with Lakenheath where I would DoD safe all my records. And thankfully it worked. I mean, but I did it over the course of 2 years, and it was only because I knew that I was going to be retiring soon and I needed that documentation. But that taught me a lot. I ended up having to FOIA for my military OneSource records, which I got, and I'm still waiting on my Fleet and Family Service records. I still haven't gotten them from all my years of serving. And it's just a very interesting concept that in the military, these things are so, like you said, so stovepiped into different organizations. And sometimes perhaps it was done by design so that those services would be confidential and people would not be worried that those pieces of information would appear in their medical record. But it had unfortunately an adverse effect of sometimes, like you said, the provider that the person's seeing at the same time, or maybe a few months later or years later, doesn't understand the history or the record of care, because of the fact that it's been so fragmented across all these other organizations that serve the military.
Yeah, I feel like, in my mind, I see the numbers, like the suicide numbers for active duty for veterans, and it's higher than it should be. And that's my personal opinion. Like, I feel like we can do a better job. Like, I feel like the numbers should be below the national population average. And I think the things that we're talking about could achieve that. Like if you can improve sharing of records and crosstalk, if you can improve protections for privacy, if people can talk to a mental health provider without fear of prosecution.
For sure.
And I want to mention, like, at one point in my career, there was a Navy admiral, and he was a psychiatrist. This was like 20 years ago. And he said, if a patient tells you they're homosexual, they should be reported for prosecution. And at the time, I think that nobody really agreed with him that was appropriate, but it's kind of legal, like if somebody says that they committed a crime or something, I guess there's a rule that you can report them. But I think there was an actual situation where that occurred, like a sailor told a mental health provider that, and they reported them, and then I think the military decided that what they did was not illegal, but it was unethical. I think the person got removed from their professional association because they said that was the wrong thing to do. But I think that we could, they should clarify that out. Like when can a mental health provider make a disclosure, and that it should not be used for prosecution.
Yep. The other thing that you addressed in terms of solutions in your book were, can you tell me a little bit about process, standardized operating procedures? I struggle to understand why each branch does mental health differently. Like, why isn't there DoD or DHA standardizing some of the procedures that mental health is governed by?
I'm a fan of standardization. I'm pretty sure there's people that would disagree with me, because they would tell you that, like the Army and the Navy, they're different and they have special needs, but in some ways they are, in some ways they aren't, and it's interesting the experiences that I've had, that each service has like strengths and weaknesses, but to me, it makes sense to kind of standardize it out and have the same system and policies for everyone, especially I live here in Hampton Roads, and they call it like a tri-service market. It's actually more than that because there's Coast Guard, but there's like Army, Air Force, Coast Guard, Navy here, and there's Marine Corps too, if you consider them another service. So if everyone was doing the same thing and everyone was following the same rules and everyone was, using the same systems, to me, it would just kind of flow better. And, I mentioned in my book that at one point I saw this research project where somebody was trying to inventory all the mental health policies, and I think there was like 300 of them or 250 of them. It's just like, it's too much. It's too confusing. Like they should kind of standardize it down, and then everyone should deserve the same quality of care. So if an airman sees mental health and they get diagnosed with major depression and they get a board, then a sailor should have that same opportunity. Like they shouldn't be diagnosed differently. They shouldn't be, handled differently. So that's kind of an observation that I have, that things are kind of chaotic and they're kind of fragmented, and it just creates all this chaos and confusion. And I think I wrote a few examples of that in my book, where there was like a Navy psychiatrist that was working at an Army hospital, and things are completely different for mental health, like the way the Army does things. Or you have, I think there's probably other situations like that where, let's say a soldier would work at a Navy hospital or something, and it just would. I think that, to me, it seems like the DoD is headed in that direction, where instead of having like a Navy hospital, they're having like a DHA hospital. So why not just
standardize it, like you said, like standardize those procedures as well? What were some of your observations from going from the military system to the VA system?
So yeah, the VA is it's focused on recovery, and I feel like it's, I've had many discussions with some of my colleagues, and it's I feel like it works better. It's certainly not perfect, and a lot of people have criticisms of the VA and other agencies, but it's more focused on like protection of people and recovering and strengthening people, whereas the DoD system is like, it's fixated on fitness for duty. And a lot of times I feel like it's kind of a mistake that, like you're a sailor and you go see a mental health provider, 75% of their energy is focused on, what's your diagnosis? Are you fit for duty? When the real issue is like, how can we help you? Like, how can we make you a better sailor? How can we help you recover or strengthen from whatever it is you're suffering from? And I feel like a lot of times that the fitness for duty stuff is like chasing a paper tiger. Like it's kind of a waste of energy, and it's better to just, better to focus on what are we going to do? How are we going to fix it? It kind of gets back to what I was saying. Like you go see a mental health provider, and on the first time they diagnose you with a bad diagnosis and then initiate your process for discharge. Like that's wrong. Like it's not helpful to the military. It's not helpful to the member. But yeah, the VA, I think it has a different approach. Like it's more focused on recovery, and I just hear better stories. Like you don't hear stories like a mental health provider like screamed at the patient and was really harsh to them.
Gotcha. What was your intent by writing the book and putting this out into a non-medical audience, into the public? Like what is it that you hope to achieve with writing this book?
So I'm a military psychiatrist, and I have over 20 years of experience. And I was kind of at a point in my career where I wanted to make a contribution to my field. And also, over the course of my career, I've heard all these stories about human suffering. And I wanted to advocate for my patients, for service members, for veterans, for for their families, because I think we can do a better job. And, when there's a lot of talk about military mental health, and you read an article, say something happens, but you never really see the full picture. Like it's a complicated thing, and there's many different spinning wheels, and so what I wanted to do was I wanted to advocate and eliminate human suffering, and I wanted to do a deep dive, and I wanted to stimulate a discussion about military mental health, and just is there anything we can do to move the needle forward? That's what my colleagues and I say. And since World War II, especially since Vietnam, military mental health has slowly moved forward, and we're getting better and better at it, and we're definitely not done. And so that's what my hope is. I hope that people would, I set out to create a discussion in academic work, and I hope people would think about it, and let's collaborate.
Right.
Let's put our heads together, just like I'm recommending in the book. Let's all work together, and let's figure out how we can improve mental health. And I'm a big fan of your show, and so much of the topics that you cover affect people's mental health. And if you feel like you're being unfairly treated, or the promotion system isn't fair, or you've got a toxic work environment, those things have to be addressed. Like if you can address those things, if you can work on the underlying issues, then we can get at those numbers. Then we can reduce suicide. We can reduce the impact the military mental health has on its members.
Absolutely, Robert. I mean, that's the root cause diagnosis. And that's what I really look to do when I do a podcast, is I want to look at what is the root cause issue that's causing the problem. And just doing simple things like standardizing the treatment across services, so people know what to expect when they go into a provider's office. Making sure that there's always off-duty referrals if there's not enough providers at a military hospital. Making sure that people get a diagnosis that is accurate to the symptoms, not one that will process them out quickly, but is accurate to the symptoms that they describe. Understanding the rules on disclosure. The service member walking into a provider knowing what can be disclosed to their chain of command and what can't be disclosed to their chain of command, and having that conversation up front, having a requirement to even maybe sign a disclosure form, or a form that you understand what will be shared and what won't be shared. Those are all things that we could be doing to enhance the level of care. Another thing that I wanted to ask you your thoughts about, what about alternative treatments like EMDR or other ways in which I know the VA has taken a look at looking at things like medical marijuana, which of course we can't do, but there are other things that military members can do as therapeutic approaches that are out, maybe even outside of a diagnosis and a pill, or a diagnosis and certain treatments. So what is your thoughts on that? Do you think there's more exploration that could be done in those areas?
Well, I want to comment on that, but you had me so thinking so much and excited there with previously what you were saying. But yeah, I'm 100% on board with what you're saying. Like, I feel the DoD could provide more direction by cleaning up those policies and saying, your medical records are not going to be released to for criminal prosecution, and they could better explain kind of what situations records would be released, or how they would be used. Because I feel like if it doesn't say, and I got this feedback from a number of people, if a policy doesn't say what you can't do, then it means you can kind of do it. So if it, and I feel like a lot of times people are acting they feel like they're acting in good faith. Like everyone's trying to do the best they can, and then it's like something kind of goes bad. Like,
Sure.
I think I've seen a situation where I talked to a command one time, and I felt like what I was doing was proper, and then the command made kind of inappropriate disclosures, and then it made the situation worse. So if you could kind of clean up the policies and kind of iron it out a little bit more, so people understand where their lanes are, and then absolutely what you said, like if. And I personally feel that the military mental health providers should not be involved in negative personnel actions, because I feel like it creates more harm than good. Or they should use like an independent person to do that. So like, let's say I'm a treating provider, and then somebody else is like an independent assessor, and that way the patient, the service member, they don't have to be confused, or they don't have to feel like the doctor is harming them. I feel like there's a lot of room for improvement as far as those issues go. But yeah, as far as alternative treatments, the military mental health system, they're focused on what they call evidence-based treatments. They want to make sure that the treatment is safe and effective. And there have been situations where treatments made things worse. So I mentioned in my book, there was a form of like psychological debriefing that actually made things worse. There was some research about it, but the idea that somebody was involved in some kind of trauma, and that they were going to do like a debriefing, and it actually increased the risk of PTSD, like forcing somebody to talk about something when they weren't ready. So I feel like the military, they want to, the military and just everyone in general, they want to make sure that treatments are safe and effective. So you read all the stuff on social media, and people are really excited about certain treatments, but it's hard to kind of justify. We want to make sure that we're not doing harm to people. But yeah, I'm excited about the future. I mean, there seems to be new and upcoming treatments that are available, but it's kind of tricky. And then I feel like it also gets to discussion of money. Like those treatments cost money, and they want to get paid, and like who's going to pay for it and who's going to authorize it, and it turns into a big mess.
Right. It is tough. And I mean, the VA's struggling with that, struggling with trying to figure out what kinds of treatments, alternative to diagnosis and medication, that can be done. I was very fortunate when I was in London, seeing an off-base provider who referred me to a psychiatrist who administered EMDR. And I found EMDR to be very beneficial, because what it did is it removed the emotional charge of what we were discussing, and it turned it into something very objective. And it truly did help me move past some of these issues, because I was able to see it from almost like from a lens of outside looking in. And I really think that there are other alternatives out there that can help, and that we should do our best to provide people with the resources and the means to do so. But your book was excellent, not only because you attacked the issue from so many different angles, you shared your experiences across the services, so you did contrast and comparison among the branches, and then even the VA. And then you also use different case studies to describe some of the major issues that you would see. And the other piece that I liked about it is that it was not at all a hit piece. It was a piece that is driven towards reforming the system by pointing out ways that we can be better.
I appreciate that, and I feel like the military has a tendency to witch hunt people and go after people. And I think I did mention the human suffering element, and I just wanted to capture in my book, like the stories that I hear and like how people are treated, like how that affects their lives. And I feel like that's an easy fix. You know, we talk about experimental treatments or expensive medications or other things, but you know, how you treat somebody is free. Like
Yeah.
if you have a service member that's under your command, like you can treat them in a respectful way and you can be sensitive to them and you can treat them like a human being. And that probably is the best protective factor, I think, for mental health. And just, yeah, I think a lot of those stories that I put in there, just kind of how people are treated. Diego
I agree.
Ugalde, he wrote a book. He was a Navy SEAL. He wrote a book about mental health and his experiences, his journey. And he talked about feeling there was a career smashing anvil over his head at all times. And if he made the slightest mistake, then the career smashing anvil is going to come down and it's going to strike. And I think the military does that too much. I think that there's too much pressure on service members, and that I think we could do something about that. Like the way that we treat people, we could reduce the pressure on people. And I think a lot of the stuff that your guests talk about, about military justice, it's like the pressure is too great. Like the stakes are too high. You know, if you make a mistake, maybe losing your career isn't the best thing. Maybe you should get some kind of punishment or pay a fine. And then they say, don't ever do it again. And gosh, you learned your lesson and you're a better sailor or whoever because of that. But yeah, maybe we need some justice reform to treat people better. But I like I said, I appreciate what you said, and I believe that kind of a systems approach, that if we kind of study what's going on without blaming people, we can get at issues. We can work together. We can collaborate. We can make the world a better place. And often I do feel that there's some bad apples out there, but a lot of time, probably most of the time, people feel like they're doing the right thing, and then it's like the system just kind of sets everyone up for failure, and then it just kind of explodes, and then we're left holding the bag.
Every show I do, an example would be, I just recently had Adam Dorito on, and he had a case where his medical records he had a command directed evaluation that he didn't even know was being the way it was going to be written or characterized, had no input into it, and it was dated several months after he had the evaluation. And it was just this idea that he wasn't even informed properly of the process. But when we go back to where his problems started on the case, it came down to one lieutenant colonel who was in charge of him, and the way that this one lieutenant colonel was treating him. And I often think that every single problem in the military stems from a problem between two people. At the end of the day, it's a problem between one person and another person, and then everybody takes sides on this issue, and everybody kind of falls in somewhere where they either isolate the person who's the victim or being discriminated against, or they sympathize with the boss, or the everyone hates the boss, but no one will speak up or speak out because they're afraid to lose their job. So there's always this dynamic that happens, and I do think that part of what will fix mental health is reforming the promotion system and the incentives that we say will make people rise to the top. And I think that is something that I'm really hopeful that the administration will further look at. We've seen that with Stu Scheller. He's working on ways in which we can improve the military officer promotion system. And I think that those reforms will really go a long way in helping people like yourself on the back end of the mental health issues. Because again, as we go into these root cause analysis issues, it's really at the end of the day about treating people better and treating people with more kindness.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And a lot of times when people come to me, they're complaining of like a toxic work situation, and the behavior is like outrageous. Like if the service member had a camera or something and put it on YouTube, that lieutenant colonel or whoever would be in a lot of trouble. But, you know, it's the idea that, you know, I personally have had these types of leaders that they look good on paper and they get the job done and they make the chain of command happy. But other than that, they have a downside. Like they're not very good with people and they're kind of harsh and abrasive. And I don't think that type of leadership style is conducive to mental health. Like you need, and I'm a firm believer in like a 360-degree evaluation. Like the people under, you know, should be rating the person above, and that way, if you had somebody like that, that could become apparent, and then the people picking the promotions would be, well, you're perfect in all these areas, but on interpersonal, like you're a number 2, and you need to work on that next year and come back, and maybe we'll give you a promotion. But that type of stuff, it really affects people. And then, yeah, I agree with you. I feel like a lot of times the command gets angry at somebody, and then they're I feel like the military is like the mafia sometimes.
Oh,
like
yeah.
You made the mafia boss mad, and they feel like you crossed them, so they're going to teach you a lesson. It's going to be a lesson for you, and it's going to be a lesson for everyone else. And don't ever cross the chain of command again. And I think that's like a mistake. And that type of mentality, it really, really affects people. It's kind of negative. It's kind of toxic, and we should do more to get rid of that. But like I said, I like the idea of having an independent prosecutor, because if you're a commander and you're mad at somebody, are you really being objective? You know, like maybe it'd be better to have an independent prosecutor to look at it and say, well, yeah, this guy, he made them mad, but it's not enough here to like prosecute, but we're going to do this, or just something else, you know, and then I hear this a lot, that people feel the system is stacked against them, you know, and a lot of times people don't know what they're doing, or they just kind of, something bad happens and they make a mistake. And then it's like the full weight of the command is thrown on them.
Sure.
And it was explained to me at one point that, let's say that somebody has a DUI, right, or some kind of incident. They're basically facing multiple pathways of adverse action simultaneously. So like if you had a DUI, you could be facing prosecution from civilian authorities. You can be facing UCMJ action. You can face medical disqualification. Like let's say you're overseas or something, and they say, well, you had an alcohol incident, we're disqualifying you and sending you home. You can also face adverse personnel actions, like you could lose your pay. You could lose your qualification, or you could lose something else. And then on top of all that, you can get a bad evaluation. And so, you know, you've got like six or seven pathways. I'm sorry, I didn't really count, but you're hurting, you made a mistake, and then, you know, the full weight of the U.S. government is coming after you. And it's like, it's too much. Like it's that career-ending anvil smashing you, and then it just negatively affects people. Like maybe we should think a little bit differently. Like how can we hold somebody accountable, but at the same time, you know, set them up so they can learn a lesson and then have a career, instead of, you know, all or nothing. You screwed up, we're cutting your head off, and that's it. And you know, it's just too much. It's just too much for people.
I agree, Robert. I mean, I had a DUI in 2014, and I'll tell you, like, the second chance that I was given was invaluable. And I've known junior sailors that have been given second chances. And then I've known junior officers and junior sailors that weren't given second chances. And it all seems very random, and it doesn't seem sometimes to match who deserved one and who didn't. And I think it's really unfortunate that the system is set up that way, because then somebody like myself who does get a second chance, then all the people that didn't get a second chance are very upset and resentful and think it's not fair. And I mean, I agree. Like, I don't think we should just throw people away because they make a mistake. And I mean, I'm living I'm living proof that you could make a mistake and still recover and move on. And in fact, my incident was instrumental in helping another junior officer recover from hers. Later on, I was able to write a letter for somebody who had also a DUI and was able to recover from her incident and move forward. So I was very fortunate to be able to be in that position. And if, that hadn't happened to me and I hadn't been given that second chance, I wouldn't have been able to do that for her. And so I think that those lessons are important to also point out. There are good people. There are wonderful people in the military. And I've been blessed to have some of them in my path. I've also worked for some of the worst leaders out there who were awful. And it's just one of those things where we really can do things to improve the conditions that cause the mental health conditions to begin with. And not everybody starts on the same page. Certain environments and certain climates and work are going to impact people differently, and some more severely based on their personal mental health history. And I think that we have to just be aware of that and do what we can to help people grow as best we can. But if people want more information or the book, tell me a little bit about where they can find it.
Well, we'll post a link in the chat, but you can just search from your bookseller like Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Yep. And the book is called Reflections of a Military Psychologist. It is available. Hold on. I'm going to put you on. Give me a minute here. Hold it up for a second, because I'm going to put you on full screen again. So there's the book, Reflections of a Military Psychologist. And I know it just got released, and I'm really excited for people to read it. If you read it and you like the book, please go on Amazon, go on where you found it, and put up a review. And as we close out the call, I think we're at the top of the hour, a little over. Tell me about what the reception has been so far about the book.
I've gotten very positive reception. I had the article from the other doctor, like he really liked it, and people, they want to know about military mental health. I was talking to a doctor, and he was working with a veteran, a sailor, and he liked the book. He felt like it gave him insight into what the sailor was suffering from. And but yeah, very, very positive. And I think everyone agrees with me that this is a problem. Like, we should, right, as a country, we need to come together. We need to make things better for veterans. So yeah, I'm looking forward for discussion, and gosh, I really enjoy talking to you, man. I was thinking about what you're saying about the substance stuff, and yeah, the like subjective application of military justice, like it. I've seen people that had a mild alcohol incident, and the government threw the book at them and ruined their career. And then you see other people I've seen people that had multiple incidents, and the government just kind of turned a blind eye to it. And so
right, it
just affects people. So hopefully, maybe the DoD could standardize that out a little bit more.
Yep, but I agree. All right, Robert.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to meet you backstage to say goodbye, but I'll go full screen. Appreciate you coming on the Stories of Service podcast, and thank you so much for sharing this contribution to our community. I think it's incredibly important.
Thank you.
All right, guys, out of town this week. So I'm in Columbus, Ohio for the VFW convention, and to see my family, and also celebrate one of my friend's 50th birthday. I'm also going to be going to the New York City Navy SEAL swim, sponsored by the Navy SEAL Foundation. That'll be this weekend. And then next week I'll be back in town and doing podcasts again. I believe next week I have the gentleman who started the HOTS and COTS app, which is an app that reports on dining facilities and housing and birthing. And I just can't wait to get into it. He is also a truth teller in his own right. So really looking forward to talking to him. Thank you so much for joining us. Please get Robert's book. It is so good. I mean, so many great examples of ways we can make things better, and case studies, and just things that I think will really resonate with a lot of people who've been through the mental health system, and or know somebody who has, and ways we can help one another and be better. So, as I always close these calls, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye now.